This clip is brought to you by SaveWithConrad.com.
Let's talk about what's next for Terry. It takes him 10 years and a little bit of controversy, but he eventually becomes the NWA World Heavyweight Champion. As the story goes, Dory Funk Jr. failed to show for a title shot against Jack Briscoe in Miami. Terry shows instead and defeats Jack on December 10th. Before we get into Terry's victory itself, the story behind Dory Jr.'s NWA title reign ending was he was supposed to drop the title to Jack, but then, quote unquote, got hurt in a truck accident. And Dory wound up losing the title instead to Harley Race, who then dropped it to Jack Briscoe. Many at the time questioned it. It was a little bit of world title controversy. Do you think Jack had any issues dropping the title to Terry, or was Jack just business? What do you think?
Jack was business. And I also, knowing Dory Jr. as well as I do and have for 30 plus years, I just find it challenging to believe that this is some grandiose plan so that the Oklahoman didn't beat the Texan in Texas for the coveted NWA title.
Right.
Maybe it's just because my Pollyanna vision of it, I don't want it to be true. And I don't think it was true with all that controversy. Sounds like a storyline to me. And but then all of a sudden you got several guys that have, I don't want to say squatters' rights, Conrad, but you got a lot of guys now in that chase.
Right.
And so, and subsequently going forward, how many great Jack Briscoe Funk matches were there? Even Jerry and Jack, the Briscoes versus the Funks, was a big deal. But there was always that kind of a friendly, it might not have been so friendly, but there was a non-violent rivalry. And quite frankly, I know it sounds ridiculous, but it's all that Oklahoma, Texas rivalry shit. So, but I don't think that Jack would have had any issue doing business with anybody that the NWA selected, because he was a class guy. And Jack also knew that as this program evolved, he was going to be the champion. So I don't know. It makes for a good story. I've heard a lot of renditions of it, but I just don't believe that Dory Jr. would avoid losing the title. I think it was scheduled to be lost in Houston, right? I think.
Yep. You're exactly right.
So, it's just kind of the folklore says to me that Dory Jr. would not fulfill his obligations. I don't want to believe that. I have nothing to prove it to me that it was true. Now, Bruce may have a better answer because, Bruce is so connected to Paul Bosch in Houston, and that's where Bruce's hometown. He may know more about that particular issue than I probably does, but I just refuse to believe that was happening.
Put in the context. Of course, these days, Nick Aldis is doing a great job as the NWA World Champion, but back then, the WWE wasn't what it is now. It was a territory, and obviously AEW didn't exist. The NWA was the not just governing body, but like they were professional wrestling. And so when you were the NWA World Champion, you were the top guy in the whole doggone industry, not just in Florida, not just in New York, not just Texas, but all over.
Right.
And, I'm curious from your perspective, did Terry deserve that honor? Did he make the belt? Did the belt make him? We hear that cliche a lot when it comes to belts.
Hell, I don't know. He was, I thought, I don't know how anybody could doubt the fact that Terry wasn't qualified to be the NWA champion.
Right.
He was certainly qualified. And the other thing about that too was for the NWA's piece of business, you had the Funks going to Japan all the time.
Right.
They had a business partnership there. And not only were they working on top in these major venues, they were, again, as I mentioned earlier, they were bringing some of those young Japanese talents over to Texas to work the territory, to get experience. And that was a big favor that was coveted by the Japanese booking office. I don't know if that was just Inoki or Baba. I think it was after Ricky Dozan got murdered. But nonetheless, they had a partnership. So all of a sudden, now the Japanese are getting coveted dates on the NWA champion. That was a big deal, based simply on what you just said. It was the title. It was a big deal. It was made a big deal in Japan by their writers, their magazine people, their TV shows. The NWA champion was on a pedestal. And due to the Japanese relationship with the Funks, they had an opportunity to use that champion and draw money. So it was I think Terry was, I don't think it was too soon or anything along those lines. I mean, Terry was such a contrast to Junior that people said, man, this is quite a departure, even though these guys are brothers and they have the family resemblance and they are fundamentally sound. They work snug. They tell good stories. They just have a different presentation. So I think Terry was a great choice for the champion. And you look at how smart, how shrewd the Japanese were as far as their business acumen. All of a sudden, they get a partnership that includes the NWA title.
Hard to beat.
Not a bad deal, buddy.
So eventually, and by the way, I guess it's worth mentioning in case you're keeping score at home, Terry and Dory become the first set of brothers to ever be NWA World Champions. Pretty big deal. Harley Race is going to defeat Terry in Toronto on February 6, 1977. That makes Harley a two-time NWA World Champion, but it's 424 days as champ for Terry Funk.